ADHD Rewired, episode 420. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free and secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups. Learn all about our award-winning coaching and accountability groups. You can co-work with us in our Adult Study Hall virtual membership community. You can do all of these things by going to our website at ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Sherri Cannon. Sherri is a CEO, an executive coach, and facilitator, and she has ADHD. Her mission: equip ADHD leaders to confidently lead by example, making every workplace friendlier for all brains. She has led leadership teams, development programs for diverse organizations around the world. Before turning entrepreneur, Sherri worked at Procter Gamble, where she climbed from soap sales rep to Southern California District Sales Manager. Sherri, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Glad to have you here. We talked just a couple days ago, and it was one of those kind of wonderfully ADHD conversations, scheduled for a 15-minute pre-interview. And it kind of just turned into this really great coaching conversation around leadership.
Yep, it was great.
Because that is something that as I'm growing this business here, when we're on this perpetual growth journey, that we are on a regular basis confronting those levels of ineptness until we figure it out. And then it's like, we got this figured out now. Now let's try something else. And then we're going to feel inept again. And, so it's that constant coming face to face with imposter syndrome.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I love how you put the word ineptness on it too, Eric, because I think just really understanding what's going on with an ADHD brain is what lets us not run and, flee the space and never come back and do another podcast. Like you were telling me earlier, like how many people stop doing podcasts, early.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you first were working, you said, as a soap sales rep.
Yeah.
Like actual bars of soap.
Bars of soap and some Downy fabric softener, stuff like that. Comet cleanser. Yeah.
And so talk about your kind of journey from doing that to where I think you told me that you were asked to coach some of the leaders.
Yeah. Well, I kind of I tried to draw my journey right after you and I talked so that I would have some sense of, wow, what was it anyway? And I think I have to say that, I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I got a journalism major. I thought about being a social worker, but I fled that thought. but I became a journalism major. And it was around graduation time when my then fiance said to me, "You're never going to make any money writing. What are you thinking? What are you doing?" And I let it scare me. Mm-hmm. And I took my journalism degree and I went over to the School of Business and I interviewed my butt off. And I ended up pulling an offer from Procter Gamble. This is back in the Midwest, but the offer was for where we were moving to out on the West Coast. And so it was all Cinderella from the beginning anyway. I felt weird just even being in the School of Business. That first job though, that entry-level sales rep job was kind of made for me. And it was largely that, I think, because I got a car, I got a territory, I got grocery managers, which to this day are still some of my favorite people on the planet, to give me a fun time, take me to a market, But that was because they were busy. They were interested in new things that I could tell them, and I had to move fast with them. And my brain moved fast too. And so being a sales rep was fun. Plus everything that I had to do that was honoring my quirks, it was kind of ugly and not how a neurotypical brain would do it. I could do all of it away from anybody else at home. I could prep it. And then when I got out there, that was just all mine. it was the series of promotions that followed after that.
Like what kind of stuff were you doing sort of away from the view of others?
Oh my good God. Story of my life, right? Away from the view was the complete, like deciding what would my presentation sheets, nothing was digital. We didn't have any, there was no computer or anything yet. So everything was about hand making these colorful things that would get people's attention. I mean, think about it. It was practically made for an ADHDer. And I needed to be able to flip it and do it and get them the information they needed. And it couldn't be all fluffy and, hard to follow. So I would spend evenings making sure I liked what I was visually going to take in. I prepared for them. I left something behind if they didn't buy, at that moment. But all of that got to be behind the scenes. And then I would drive my car, get out, do it, come back, rinse and repeat.
So you went from there. And then how did you get into the role of leadership and coaching?
I had a really great work ethic. I kept getting promoted. And I don't say that except that I did. I think I matched up well for a number of times at P&G. So I was there at Procter Gamble for almost 10 total years. By the time I was moved to the district manager role that you mentioned earlier, I had made it through positions that I could always find myself in. I could find the way to do that thing. By the time I was made a district sales manager, it was imposter city. I was following a guy who had hired me. The job meant come to an office, sit behind a desk, have a sales force of 20 or 25 people, get things done through others, be organized. We weren't even talking about executive function back then. But the exact kind of executive functions that are not strong for me, like prioritizing, organizing, sustaining attention, right? Those things that I know now, well, they were top expectations in that role. And I would guess that for the most part, neurotypical men at that time, were who populated that role. So if they had a job to do, but they didn't have interest in it, they just knew it was important to their boss somewhere, they could pretty much hunker down and do it. And I had this brain, which was not importance-based, right? It was interest-based, but I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So what happened really, Eric, is I make it to this position, which on a resume, on LinkedIn, anywhere you put it, still to this day carries, this kind of like stamp of, okay, well, that's for real. You did that. And when it was becoming clear to me that my boss was kind of not so sure and was asking me a lot of questions, and I was working so hard, I was exhausted. I was antisocial. People would ask me why I couldn't go out. It was because I was working all the time and I was pretty frantic a lot of that time. Why I left was that I had a medical thing come up, a normal kind of pap and pelvic exam that instead turned into a major surgery. And that major surgery gave me weeks off. And in those weeks off, I read Susan Jeffers' book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, which back in whatever year that was like revolutionary. And I came back and I decided I needed to ask for a different job. And I asked for a job that would have been more of a training or a public speaking role. And they said no to that. I knew then that I needed to go. And I actually had a consultant who was given to me by the company to help me. And she said to me every time we met, have you put together your resume for the next consumer products job? Because you need to put that resume together. And every time, Eric, I would tell her some BS thing that I don't know what I said to her, but what I knew in my heart was, if I put that resume together, that's what I'm going to do for another 10 years, because that's kind of how I am. And I knew it was wrong. So I never created that resume. And instead, I waited and the universe opened up some connections. And I found another woman kind of like me in another part of the country that had left a big company. And she said, do you want to come do this with me for a while? It was gig work, right? Before we had a gig economy. And that's how Ellen, who at that time saw me as, okay, you were just doing all that great sales leadership stuff. So I'm going to put you with leaders because you're going to be excellent at coaching. She believed in me.
Mm-hmm. And that is such that you cannot overstate the importance of having someone believe in you.
Oh,
I mean, it's especially if it's someone who is some kind of authority or, is
right?
the boss, like teacher, even a parent. I think
Yeah.
one of the most important things that parents do is, even if there's hesitation and a little uncertainty in can your kid do it, like help them believe that you believe that they can do it.
Oh,
And if
yeah.
they mess up, let them believe that you believe that they'll know how to pick themselves back up, and that
Yes.
it's okay.
You're so right. You're so right. And that's what she gave me. She gave me that. She actually she introduced me to her clients. She created things that I thought sounded kind of cool. And so I went directly into training, kind of coaching. We didn't really call it that yet, but it created this whole different universe. And from that universe, I followed public speaking. I followed another thing. I've recently learned that sustained attention is so low on executive function for me that I actually need to let others around me know, I'm really wired to do a thing until the thing either needs to be re-examined or blown up or something, and we look at it again, but otherwise I overcommit. So that's how that came to be.
Hmm. So when you were working with this, what did you say her name was?
Ellen.
Ellen.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were working with Ellen, how did, I guess I wasn't clear on how she found you and how you guys came to work together and what you were like specifically doing?
She found me because a colleague of mine, actually somebody that I had hired at the company, was paying attention. So there was somebody paying attention to what I was saying. And what I was saying was behind the scenes, holy crap, I don't want to go put together a resume and go get another job like this. I can't do that. And so it was this friend who said, hey, I know this person. She reached out to me about something else. And maybe I kind of know, I think you guys ought to maybe talk. And so it was literally one person who knew me and who had had one conversation or two with her, put us together. And I think what Ellen understood, she had come from creative background. So she had done advertising and kind of putting together promotional stuff. She had done that for a big company. She was looking for, with her consumer products companies who were her kind of clients, what else could she put in as services? And so while she was handling things that I didn't do, I believe what she saw was that she saw, okay, I have me here, a person who just stepped out of leading at that level, who I think can be respectable. And if she wants to do this, and that was key, right? Because I was very
Interest-based, as you said.
I was very checked in with, she really checked in. So she didn't just give me a box to jump into. She created that box with me.
Mm. And then, so how long were you doing that for?
So I was with Ellen and her business probably, I'm going to say, for like 2 years, maybe a year and a half to 2.
Okay.
And interestingly, Ellen then at a certain point came to me and said, hey, I met these guys when I was out on a sales call. They actually have created a public seminar company. And, you are a good speaker and I know you really like it. I just think maybe, I don't know, maybe you want me to introduce you. And I don't think I thought about that for very long, because her work was fun, but it was also a piece. It wasn't like a whole job. It wasn't that kind of revenue. And so she made that next introduction. And those guys said, sure, come in for an audition, because we're doing public seminar topics all over the country and Canada. And I went in, but auditions terrified me. I wanted nothing to do with an audition. So I became pretty skilled at getting people to understand that if they sat with me at a table and discussed what I had done and what they had, that together they'd be okay on the other side of that. And I got by with that for a long time. I avoided a lot of auditions that way.
Wow. You kind of learn that self-awareness, and then you learn those self-advocacy skills to be able to navigate in a way that works for you.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I didn't know that either. So yeah.
So at what point in your journey were you actually diagnosed with ADHD?
Yeah. So all of this was happening in the late 80s and early 90s. And I would at last be diagnosed in 2000.
Okay. So you were about 40 years old at that point, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So how did that change things for you?
Well, weirdly, the answer is it happened because I was then doing a lot of coaching and training work with tech companies. And not that it's a big deal in today's news, but back then, the tech bubble that blew up momentarily in 2000 took all kinds of training, everything that I offered, which was no longer considered essential, if you didn't have any budget. So as we know, so training and coaching all got wiped off my clients' books. And I ended up at home staring and wondering, why in the hell could I not create now? I was a journalism major. Why couldn't I write? Like I couldn't motivate. I almost look at that time as my head down, but it feels like I spent a lot of it just dragging my stuff like from one place in the house to another or out to a coffee shop, trying to gin up, the hyper focus. Right. And it was a friend in education who said to me after knowing me for a few years, you might have ADHD. Have you ever thought about that? So you can see I rely very much on the good ideas of other people.
I think a lot of us have been on the receiving end of a conversation just like that.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to dive into talking about more imposter syndrome, leadership, self-awareness, and rejection sensitivity. So we will be right back. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from ADHD Rewired's coaching and accountability groups and our alumni coaching community, all at coachingrewired.com. Hey, if you've been intending on joining ADHD Rewired's coaching and accountability groups for our spring sessions, but you missed our previous registration events, our final registration events for our spring sessions, and spring sessions begin on April 13th. Our final registration events are this week. Yes, I said this week, which means if you've been waiting for the last minute to get your name on our interest list or to complete the pre-registration requirements, that last minute is now. Stop what you're doing and go to coachingrewired.com. Our final registration events are on Wednesday, March 16th and Thursday, March 17th of this week. And we need your pre-registration submissions 48 hours ahead of each event so we have time to process it and send you your actual invitation. Go to coachingrewired.com to see the times for these last scheduled registration events for our spring coaching season. If you want to learn how to better manage your time, take charge of your calendar and make it work for you, if you want to create more ADHD-friendly to-do lists and have the support of accountability with some compassionate ass-kicking when necessary to actually get your to-dos done with a group of like-brained adults with ADHD, then come join us. Get your name on our interest list at coachingrewired.com and follow the pre-registration instructions to receive your invitation to join us. And if you've signed up but you're still waiting for your email, don't forget to check your spam folder. Find out more and get signed up for our 28th season coaching and accountability groups before it's too late. Don't get stuck on the wait list. We fill up every season, so don't wait another minute. Go to coachingrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so get started by going to coachingrewired.com and add your name to the interest list. That's coachingrewired.com. We'll see you there. Get more done with the virtual co-working community built for adults with ADHD by adults with ADHD by going now to adultstudyhall.com. From our weekly guided and facilitated sessions to our 24/7 drop-in room, there are plenty of ways you can optimize your productivity to get more done using real-time accountability. It's only $19.99 a month and it's free for the first week to try. You can cancel your membership anytime. Your membership includes access to our themed and guided sessions, also known as Ash Plus, for writing, working out, decluttering, and for your most dreaded tasks. We also have a job search session led by ADHD Rewired coach and HR specialist Kat Hoyer. And we've most recently added a new session for managing your finances and tax-related to-dos. Is the season. And I'm going to be hosting a special 3-hour Pomodoro dance party on Monday, March 28th at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern to tackle your to-dos and get your body moving. We'll be doing 50-minute work cycles and 10-minute dance party breaks. Join us for all of it or some of it. Drop in when you can. Get rewarded for coming on time. We're going to start with a 5-minute dance party warm-up, and then we're going to get to work. Dancing is required if your surroundings and body allow, but dance skills are not. Let's just move together. If you want to join the virtual co-working community built just for us, you are invited. Head over now to adultstudyhall.com to learn more about our Ask Plus sessions, our 24/7 drop-in room, and to stay up to date for any upcoming sessions and new features that we'll be rolling out. The doors are open at adultstudyhall.com. Come work with us. That's adultstudyhall.com. All right, we are back. So, Sherri, you said you were diagnosed at 40, and then this is around when the tech bubble kind of burst.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So, what then got you back into coaching executives?
So I got diagnosed. I started on a med, and I have to say, because what I had landed in was training, so a combination of coaching, executive coaching, and training. They were made for me. They allowed me to be moving, to have a beginning and an end to things, not some unending commitment. And I was always learning. I was constantly learning in those environments. And at that particular, and what was your question? What'd you say? You said, Sherri, what? And I'm answering it. It's gone.
So this is where I peel the curtain. So I use the live transcripts. So when someone asks me that question, what was the question? I can actually go back and look to see what the heck did I ask. Okay. So let's see. So when someone, oh wait.
I know what you asked.
Okay.
You asked me how, yep. Does that happen for us too? All right. So I got diagnosed. You asked me how did I come back, or what was I doing? And the answer is the work was the right kind of match for me. The budgetary stuff was temporary. I got diagnosed. I knew a little bit about my brain. I was still a skeptic, by the way. And I came from a family that didn't believe in ADHD. Mm-hmm. So I surely hadn't thought about that before. I thought it was all character flaw. I was convinced it was all character flaw. So we came back, and I resumed doing a lot of cool training with one tech company. And then what happened was that's a small enough business where people move around, and somebody would go somewhere and would ask me to come in and do the same thing. And at that time, coaching was also just beginning to be named, becoming a thing that could be other than on a sports or in a sports arena. So I found that interesting. I really loved the training. But when someone asked me in a class, could they meet with me one-on-one to talk about this class stuff? That was my cue to say, well, I guess so, right? And then I reached out and went, what's coaching? And kind of found enough out about that. And so over time, that's what kept happening. I just kept going with where people had moved someplace else, and we had a good thing, and they asked me to come in. And I did. And that evolved to working with teams, over extended periods or an event. And the finest thing that anybody ever said to me after a workshop was, you're a different experience, because it seems almost like you're learning the material with us. And I think some people would not find that to be the big compliment that I did. But I do, because that's always how it all feels.
When you were starting to work with leaders on a one-on-one level, I take it that you were working with a lot of people who are also struggling with this imposter syndrome.
Yes, I drew them. I kind of attracted them.
And, part of ADHD is, there's all these different constructs of executive function. But one of the, I think the executive functions that often is maybe not talked about enough is self-awareness. Because self-awareness is an executive function.
Oh, man.
Because we have to think about self-regulation. It requires the ability to self-monitor, right? And self-monitoring is self-awareness in real time.
Yeah.
So when you're working with leaders who maybe don't have that dialed in self-awareness, what does that kind of look like as a coach? And how do you think that looks like from the perspective of the client? Because I think, whether we are formally a leader in a business, I think all of us can be leaders in our life, right? Whether it's with a
Absolutely.
family, whether it's just even just leading ourselves, right?
No small thing.
Right.
Right.
Oh, absolutely. So if part of ADHD is not always most self-aware, how do you help people kind of with
Right.
that?
That's such, how good of a question that is, right? Because ADHDers also tend to think we're very aware because we're in our heads all the time trying to figure our crap out, right? So I copped to that. I actually always thought I had a really high metacognition, as some folks call it, in executive function land. But my experience with it, Eric, is that when someone arrives, and if I'm working with a neurodiverse client, actually I do it with everybody. So about 20% of my practice is neurotypical, or 25, and the balance tends to be more neurodiverse. But I ask everybody to do the simple self-executive function assessment. And that tends to present us with what we see as our strengths and don't. I then really poke into it and test for it by really working to ask folks to deconstruct with me. For example, when there's been an amazing experience for somebody, a real signature event in their career or in their life, or they were 5 or they were 55, it doesn't matter. Whatever that is, though, all they really have to have is enough trust, right? A little bit of trust to know that there's so much gold laying around us all the time as neurodiverse folks. And it's somebody else, anybody, but anybody who's really focused on deconstructing a great, positive, rewarding, empowering event. If you can hang in for that as the client, I promise you, right, that what we start to be able to create is a map that says, whoa, here's a tendency. It tends to come up kind of again and again that Sherri needs a huge level of interest or urgency, right? Or an audience waiting, or somebody who said something to her that was so powerful that she's just got to talk about that right now. So I look for those. And I also look for when folks are holding on to what we feel is a failure or a complete imposter moment. I look for that as well. Like I've had imposter moments that happened because I stopped being able to avoid auditions. So all of it is there. All of it is useful typically. And what we're looking for is how to stop just running around the inside of a box, thinking, what do I do differently? And to be able to realize there's a lid. If I look up, there's a lid on the box. Let me at least get myself oriented to my own roadmap and then start to actually work with, what? There's a way that a lot of folks tend to do that thing. But I actually have experience that there are some different ways that I need. And then we need the confidence to bust through the imposter crap and own that.
So when you're working with leaders who have ADHD, what are some of the common challenges that leaders are coming to you with? Because I think the imposter syndrome is I'm feeling as an imposter because I can't do X, Y, or Z, even though I feel like I quote unquote should be able to, right?
Right.
So,
or the way I'm doing it, I think is so suspect, or I think that it can't possibly be passing, muster for anybody else. I think there's that. So there's that imposter piece. There's often, depending on what all the experiences of a lifetime, have been, right? There can be a level of shame that just makes believing that this is a brain chemistry issue. It's not a character flaw, right? It's brain chemistry. And I still learn that lesson. I learn that often because I default to the other. I think the biggest challenge is helping folks move from, I want to fix this and I want to make this go away, right? To, it's actually not something for me to eradicate. It's actually like a hint. It's a clue. And if we build that out, we're going to create leaders who are able to not only put themselves in the positions and the situations where they can contribute best, but they're going to model that in a way that right now we don't get it modeled very often. You lead really differently as a leader. How come? Well, maybe because you had to leave anything conventional, to go do that. And what I'd like to see is just a whole lot more of the unconventional.
So, when we were talking the other day, one of the things we were talking about was this sort of challenge that I've been becoming more and more aware that I'm having of, where it's like, if I'm facilitating groups or leading sessions, like I'm great. I'm in my zone there, right? I'm really good at that. when I am leading a meeting that is like with my coaches or with my team, sort of a collaboration meeting, there's brainstorming and there's decisions and like I feel that I have no idea what I'm doing and I feel completely exhausted from those kinds of meetings where like leading coaching groups, like that energizes me, right? And I'm like trying to figure out like it's not that much different, but it kind of is. Like how much of this experience that I'm having are you
Mhm.
seeing with people who are in more that leader role or more from that, like going from, there are a lot of people with ADHD, there's a lot of entrepreneurs who have ADHD, but I
Mhm.
think there's a difference between being an entrepreneur and like, and starting a business and actually like running a growing business in the role of a CEO. It is a different
True.
role.
True.
So when you're working with leaders, like what are you seeing as like the most common types of struggles?
So let's see. Let me do bullet points. So what you're describing, I think the commonality of that is that we hold an arena that we're already skilled in, comfortable in, and effective in, right? We hold that as not a big deal. That's not a big deal. I got that. But we don't maybe examine, right, to the point of what's the commonality then between the meeting that Eric now wants to call and have be a co-creating, kind of collaborative thing. What's common to both those things? And and what I would say, you have lots of people that join you in this is, it's that flat landscape piece. Like if you change the environment, you tell me now that it's a precious 1 hour or 2 hours of a whole bunch of people's time, the onus, right, or the burden of, oh, okay, now I'm CEO and I'm leading this and I'm taking up people's time. So I think it can create a knee jerk kind of reaction that makes us hark back to, okay, when people run meetings and they're good, this is what's supposed to happen. And what I would offer is, no, not necessarily, right? Because what matters more than anything is, can things be micro broken up? Can we break them apart enough that we can figure out, what do you absolutely want to bring people together for? Yeah. Then what do you absolutely want to have happen there? And then what are the things that can support what we know to be weak executive functions around it? But I also have one client who is a pretty new solo rabbi in a congregation, and he's pretty open about his ADHD. He said to me one day, when people ask me, Rabbi, what do you think about this? He said, finally, I just found myself saying, how do I know what I think until I hear what I say?
Oh my gosh, I could so relate to that.
Right? And what I love about it is that if he can get that out there, and it can be not only chuckled over, but it can actually be operationalized into, okay, you know what? I'm not going to get there that way, but let's have this conversation first, because we're going to get there. And we may have some more stuff that comes along with it. So there's one. What you want to, I don't want to.
No, keep going, please.
Okay. I like to see where you relate. Okay. The other that I see show up, this shows up more often lately, and I'm just going to throw it out there. It's the idea that I hear from folks when they show up and say, I've never planned my career. They're saying it as a huge, this is my penance now, right? Like things are really messed up because I didn't plan my career. And I have a lot of thoughts about that. And I bet everybody listening does too. I didn't plan my career. It's clear. Every question you asked me had to do with a conversation with somebody. But we are all, from the time we're tiny, right? We are this product. We're this evolving person. I mean, we don't know. And getting stuck isn't pleasant for a neurodiverse brain. So there is a concern that folks have over, if I'd been more proactive or a better planner, then this would work. And sometimes they just doubt the practices that they're relying on. I had one guy who had been made a first line manager in a water district environment. And he worked with his team in the same room with him. And he was concerned. He was concerned about how was he doing communicating with his team. And when I asked him all these questions, he ended up describing to me this beautiful natural process he'd put in place where if someone raised a question, they were either doing it by email or however they were doing it, and he thought it was relevant to the group, he had just created an entire environment where he'd say one word like group, and everybody would just turn their chairs and all create an instant in that moment, a quick meeting. It wouldn't go into email. It wouldn't get dragged through anything else. And he was just describing it like it was no big deal. And I was listening to what he was telling me he'd done. And I was thinking, dude, you are breaking through, the way that we get trapped in killing ideas by he had a group that he could use that way.
Part of what I'm hearing you say is it's all really about identifying what the need is, what the challenge is, and then coming up with processes to really fall to in order to do the things that you're wanting to do.
Well, and you and I talked about one, I think, how do we, who are also a little weak on this sometimes, how do we make sure that when our teams are together and they leave, that everybody's going with like, yes, that's what we agreed on. And I go back to Pat Lencioni and the 5 dysfunctions work, like I know you like too. Mm-hmm. And that is, we build in not oh my God, we're out of time. Everybody get out of here and we'll follow up later. That's a recipe for failure. But rather, we make sure that somebody in that group who really likes to run process is reminding you, with like 10 minutes left, that now it's time for us to go around and hear from everybody here out loud, Zoom, wherever. You don't have to be in the, but what are you taking away? What is your action? What are you doing? So that we have that moment to either go correct, yeah, or, get it right.
So what we're going to do is take a quick break. And when we come back, we will continue this conversation. So we will be right back. Hey, you know that there are a lot of ways that you can support this podcast. One of the best ways, if you are able to support this podcast, is to become a patron over at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. I want to welcome David M., who became a patron this week. Thank you so much for your support. And thank you to all of our patrons, past and present. We've had hundreds of patrons who have supported us over at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. You can become a patron starting at any amount. We have perks starting at just $5 a month, where you can get ad-free episodes of this show in your own private podcast feed that you can use on your favorite podcast app. Unless your favorite app is Spotify. I don't think that they support the private podcast feed. But for all of the other ones, you can get that feed right into your podcast player. Then patrons at the $25 a month level can join me for our patron-only monthly coaching call every 4th Tuesday of the month, which means our next monthly coaching call is next week on Tuesday, March 22nd at 3 p.m. Central. That's March 22nd at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. If you are a patron at the $25 a month level, tell your phone or your smart speaker right now to remind you about this so you don't forget. I want to have you there. Whether you're looking for perks from the show or you want to support the podcast because you believe in the work that we are doing, then head on over to ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. Again, the perks start at just $5 a month, but you can support us at any amount that makes sense for you. Thank you to all of our patrons who support the show, both past and present. Consider becoming a patron to support the show by going to ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. That's ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. And thanks, everyone. If you are enjoying this podcast, and if you are new to this podcast, I want to let you know about all of our other podcasts that we have here on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. Go check out ADHD Essentials with Brendan Mahan, Hacking Your ADHD with Will Curb, ADHD Diversified with MJ Siemens, and the ADHD Friendly Lifestyle with ADHD Rewired Coach Moira Mabin. You can find all of these shows on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network by going to ADHDrewired.com/podcast network, or just search your podcast player for any of those shows I just named. Then every second Tuesday of the month, you can join the whole ADHD Rewired podcast family, including Coach Kat Hoyer, for our monthly live Q&A. Our next live Q&A is on Tuesday, April 12th at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. register. To register so you can join us on Zoom, head on over to ADHDrewired.com/events. Click on register here under the events banner so you can get notified of our next monthly live Q&A and all of the other Q&As after that. If you enjoy the show and are getting value from it, make sure you hit subscribe so you always get episodes automatically uploaded to your podcast player. And please consider leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast player that accepts reviews. Did I suggest that you smash that subscribe button? You don't want to miss any of these episodes. Whether you've been listening for a while or you're joining us for the first time, thank you for listening and being a part of this community. Discover more from ADHD Rewired by going to our website at ADHDrewired.com. That's ADHDrewired.com. All right, so we are back. When we were talking the other day, you mentioned this combination of this presentation of the experience of people with ADHD when we were talking about sort of that poor self-awareness combined with that high sensitivity or that rejection sensitivity. From a coaching perspective, I mean, I'm kind of like a feedback junkie. Like I want to know my blind spots. Like give me my blind spots because not knowing them hurts more. And yes, discovering a blind spot, because I'm someone who self-awareness is a core value. And I know that enough that I know I still have blind spots because after years and years of thinking I know myself, really well, and then uncovering more and more blind spots, it's okay, I'm just going to always assume that there's going to be more blind spots that I'm just not seeing. So, I don't think I'm super sensitive to negative feedback. I mean, sometimes I can be. And I think I've gotten better at that. I think earlier when I started my business, if someone in one of my groups maybe didn't have the most amazing experience, I was like, oh God, what did I do wrong? Why, And it's I realized, sometimes it's just because someone didn't put the effort in, that's not on me, So, and it took me a while to get to that point. But so for leaders who need to constantly be increasing that self-awareness and at the same time are sensitive to feedback, what do you do?
What I've been doing lately with leaders, especially did a lot of it this year, has been doing my own interviewing for the leader with the key stakeholder group to elicit, right? Both what are the top 3 strengths, the things that you're so solid at that if you didn't do those things, we would not be effective, right? And to really also find what would you want to see that person focus on or expand or do more of or stop doing. So it's a stop, start, continue question, right? I would love to see you stop doing this or start doing this or do more of this thing. What I can say is what's always helpful. So however you get there, whether you have a Sherri or somebody who's stepping in and doing the interviewing, or whether you're asking for it, what's always helpful, of course, is context, right? It's the context. So I think it sounds like what you've learned too, Eric, over the years is there's going to be another thing. So let me not assume that. What we want to do too is assume if I understand the experience, if this was important enough to you to tell me that you wish I would do a thing less, you wish that I would tell you that we're going to talk about something and then not do it. You wish that I would follow through more and better. What I can do then in an interview is to say, give me a time where you really witnessed Eric doing that or not doing that. Give me something so we can bring ourselves back to it. Because the other thing that comes up for a lot of my leaders is that the feeling or the emotion that they had in the moment that they communicated something very important to them, well, as we know, that can just be like vapor, right? I mean, it's not that it doesn't matter anymore. You're not in that moment anymore. Working memory isn't serving you. You're not connected up to it anymore. So sometimes ADHDers, especially, we need a way to rebuild or to constitute what was the context of that? What were my actions? But especially, how did my actions bounce? How did they affect you? And what did you really need in that moment? Because that's how if you're being coached by me, that's how you're going to create something positive going forward is, oh, this is what I learned from that. That mattered. I want to keep that in mind. How shall I do that? Maybe I'll keep a Post-it in front of me for a while with a picture, a word or whatever. Does that help?
Yeah. With in my organization, I really I'm trying to really create this culture of feedback where it's like, let's constantly give each other feedback. Let's leave egos at the door. Like if I'm sucking at something, you need to tell me that I'm sucking at something so I can, so if I could address it, either I could work on it myself or say, you know what, let me give this to somebody else to do because this is not something that I'm probably going to be really good at. One of the things that one of my coaches gave me feedback on was because I've been so used to, as the founder of this business, like laying down the tracks as the train is coming. Like I got this idea, it comes to me, I just go with it, right? And so I had like a month or two ago, I had announced something that I was thinking about doing in one of my alumni sessions. And then one of my other coaches, I guess, was asked about this by one of her group members, and she had no idea what they were talking about. And so she kind of called me on that. And she was like, if you're going to announce things, can you like let us know? So, and I'm just like, it's totally fair. And it's really hard because it's like I get these ideas and like in the moment of that context, it's like, yeah, I just wanted to get some like feedback on this idea before I even like announce it as like saying this is what we're doing. It's like I'm sharing this idea, something I'm thinking about doing. I thought it was fair feedback, but it's like it requires me to slow down.
Yeah. And it requires you to slow down in that moment. Did it come, Eric, out of the fact that you were gathering, like you were hearing points of view and it kind of brainstormed up for you, or had you?
So what it was, we were, I think it was, so at the end of the year from our alumni, I lead 4 weeks in a row of weekly sessions all around yearly planning. And so we have a lot of introspective questions that we give people time to journal around. And people were really responding really positively to it. They really, really liked the process that we were going through. And one of the ideas that I had for starting in 2022 was to bring more of these kinds of questions and spend more time in our alumni sessions, giving people 15 minutes to journal on a sort of an introspective type of question. And so I just, because I had been thinking about that, recently, and I was in that moment getting that feedback of they really like this. So I threw out the idea, say, hey, I'm thinking about this. What do you think about that? But I did not consider how that might affect my other coaches if they were, that they were asked about it and they didn't know what they were talking about.
Yeah. And so one organic way maybe for you too will be to socialize with your team that, and you probably have already, but that understanding that, wow, when I'm in the moment and I'm gathering and I'm hearing, I know I tend to say those things. And every time that I can remember, every time I can catch it and grab it and make sure I'm saying it back to you, I will. I think you have to ask for some forgiveness too in advance, right? Which is, we don't want to slow you down so much that your concern now becomes, oh crap, that's an idea, but we don't want to get in your head too much.
Right. And it just has the idea of like rolling anything out. It would be helpful for them to know before something is announced.
Yeah. And people like to, nobody wants to have that deer in the headlights. Look like, what did he say? Yeah.
And one of the things that I have learned to do and gotten better at, because it's kind of bit me in the ass a couple times, is I'm very much like sort of like that rabbi. I don't know what I'm thinking until I say it out loud. Right. And so I've learned in more conversations with people, just preface something by saying, I'm just thinking out loud. Like this isn't necessarily what we are doing. I want to say it as if it's what we're doing so I can feel how it lands.
Beautiful.
Because I've there's been a number of people over the years that I know I've like really disappointed because like from what they heard, we were doing this thing, right? From where I was sitting, I was just brainstorming. And I know communication is not what's said, it's about what's received, right? And so it's like, I could have the greatest intentions. I could have not meant for it to come off that way. But like, if it's not just a one-time thing, but there's a pattern of, oh, I've gotten that feedback before. Oh, this is familiar feedback. It's like, oh, okay. So learning to do that. And as I'm reading more and more stuff on leadership, like just really, I think, more appreciating that when I say something, it holds more weight. And it's
There
like,
it is.
I have a hard time with that. I'm like, I'm just Eric,
Eric.
but I guess it is. And that is part of what has made ADHD Rewired grow in the way it is, has been like, I've gone with a lot of intuition and just like instinct, and I just had an idea and I just move forward with it. Right. As I'm building an organization that involves more people, that requires a different skill set.
And what I love the most, what I by the way, the fact that you care that much about what that creates for your team isn't lost on the team either, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because every time, I'm sure if you get that feedback, I bet it's pretty clear for anybody else that Eric hates it when that happens. What I also really love about what you've done is that you had it's that next step back. Like as ADHDers, we can do a pause and then, oh my God, we can get good if we can do another pause. And what I hear is that you've started to get articulate about, I'm going to say some stuff now and I'm going to put it in this light because that's the way my brain's going to have to think about it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to become a thing. And be fun with it. Right. Mm-hmm. It's just so human. It's so human.
And I even like catch myself sometimes when I'm talking with my assistant and she's taking notes of what I'm saying. And I'll see that she's taking notes. Like, oh no, I'm just like verbally processing right now. This is not actual actions that need to happen right now. Like, but I also forget to do that sometimes. Mm-hmm. Like she'll start taking the notes and then I would kind of follow her lead in that of like, and then I was like, wait a minute, I was just brainstorming and I almost forget that was like verbally processing.
Yeah. And so has she also been learning? I'm curious. Has she also been learning to insert early and say, are you verbally processing right now?
I think sometimes, yeah. And I think that would be actually a really good conversation for us to have, just to ask that question more to me.
Yeah. I love what you just did too, right? So you just elevated it to, oh, don't know, but that takes us up another level too. Okay, that can become its own, two-way to just ask for that more as a prompt, give somebody the permission, because back to your point about as CEO, yes, you're right. When you say stuff, people who are on your team want to feel like they want to feel informed. Everything has more weight. So it's also a beautiful thing, if what you're able to say to somebody is, I don't care really whether you're sure or not. I'm just completely deputizing you to step in and say, are you out loud processing right now or what?
Yeah, because it's like it sucks what I'm communicating was not received and someone gets disappointed because of something that just wasn't clear. And then when they give me that feedback, I'm like, I could see how you thought it that way. Right. And so it's like, it's fair. Right. And then it's like, I try to not let the itty bitty shitty committee like beat me up too much.
Yeah.
Because, when I do something that affects someone else in a negative way, that's where I get into like really deep self-reflection. I'm like, I have to learn this stuff. And so like, I've been like binging all the leadership books and all the books on how to run more effective meetings. And I just read this book. Hold on, let me see if I can. It's under a pile.
I can't wait to see. What is it? It went to another room.
Oh, there it is.
You put it away.
It's so weird. I can't find stuff because I put it away. God.
I know. What are you doing?
So the book is Where the Action Is, the meetings that make or break your organization. And this,
a mind map?
Yeah, it looks like on the cover, it's like a mind map. And one of the things that was really helpful in this book is she makes the argument to first of all, stop just calling them meetings. And she lays out there's like 17 specific types of meetings and label it as what the meeting is. And it was just like, this was just a great book to realize like, oh, I am doing meetings wrong in every way possible. But it's also I'm learning. Like, I know these meetings have not been great,
And dude, that's the conventional world, right? I mean, like the way we got here and the reason that we all like groan over meetings basically and think they're a waste of time and do something else during them. That's very common in big, but I think that's because there hasn't been an articulation like that. Mm-hmm. I can't wait to read that actually.
No, I learned, things like the meeting leader and the meeting facilitator doesn't need to be the same person. To me, I was like, wait, what? And then it's like, because I'm there trying to take the notes to capture what the agreements and commitments were, trying to like come up with the agenda, trying to follow the agenda, trying to guide conversation, trying to say how much of this the sort of tangential but important discussion should we actually go down. trying to do all of that, like I feel like I just need like a day-long nap sometimes after these.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's just like, it literally feels like it taxes every executive function. And I think part of what it is I haven't identified the scaffolds that I need for those kinds of meetings yet.
Yeah. And does her to do the 17 things, does that help you start to get to that? Or are the scaffolds even more unique to you?
Well, I think that some of it does, because it gives me that sort of that structure of, okay, like this is this kind of meeting. Like it made me talk about how like a one-on-one is not a meeting. That's a conversation. And I was like, interesting.
Nice. Oh, I love that already.
Right. So I always listen to my audiobooks, but I bought it because I was like, okay, I'm going to need to like mark this thing up. And there's certain books that I'm like, I might benefit from like reading this thing 5 times.
Yeah.
This is going to be one of them.
That's like, so great.
Because it's a skill. And I think that I haven't had a lot of good examples of people running really good meetings, right? Someone once asked me recently, or maybe it was on a podcast I was listening to. I can just remember that it happened while I was working out on my elliptical, and the weird details that you remember.
Always remember where I am too.
Right.
Replace space.
And it's like, think about what you think currently of your meetings. So my first response was exhausting.
Okay.
Then come up with what would need to happen for that to be the opposite.
Nice.
And I was like, ooh, so what would I need to do to create an energizing, exciting meeting? And I don't have the answer yet, but it's a really fun question to be kind of contemplating.
And that would give you permission. Like what came up for me was, I think this, here comes my ADHD. I think you just said this during this conversation where you were thinking about with your alumni group, having them journal.
Mm-hmm.
Did that? Yeah. Okay. So here's a thought. You might benefit, as might your facilitator with you or whoever's keeping time, but maybe there's a point in a meeting, whatever we're calling it, that gathering, right? Where there's 5 minutes for everyone to gather thoughts, right? To gather thoughts, to look at what questions are standing out based on what we've talked about so far. Are you clear? I'm just also always looking for, where can we give ourselves that rest stop where we think we've just got to get it out, and get through it, where maybe we'd all benefit by breathing, and pausing. And
it's funny, whenever I've read or heard that like one of the most important parts of a meeting and often can take the same length of the meeting is the actual preparing for the meeting. And every time I hear that, I just kind of want to stick my fingers in my ears and go, no, I don't want to hear that. I don't agree.
I don't agree.
You don't agree with that?
I buy it because it's always been out there about training and education, the designing training. You can always view it with that ratio. But maybe what we're really describing here is if we take this big fluffy meeting thing and we really say, but what are going to be the very vital kinds of meetings for ADHD Rewired, right? What are they? What are of the 17, which could you see yourself really wanting to call? And what would you like to call them? And the other thing to watch out for usually is then how do we decide where is it really a conversation between a couple of people, but where do we start including everybody because we just think we need to do that, so that we're cautious about the overabundance of, oh, you're on the team and I don't want you to feel like you're not, so let's all do it, versus how many sub things can happen out here before we actually come together. So again, I think you can keep pulling it apart. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure I want to buy into that it takes gazillions of hours to. No.
Okay.
Nobody's doing that I see.
Okay. Okay. That is good. That is good to know. Yeah. I mean, it's when you get into, as in the space that I'm in, my goal is to help people, right? And by helping people also feel valued and seen and empowered, that's going to help the people in my organization help more people, right? And one of the struggles that I have with the number of people who are in the organization is checking in with all of them. I think we were talking about this on a Wednesday, that like, is it actually possible to have a 5-minute conversation with someone? I would love to be able to, like, on a regular basis, just so I can check in with more people so they know that I'm thinking about them, to like do the 5-minute conversation, which is so hard because I, for one, have that one more thingitis real bad. And most of the people who I'm talking to who have ADHD also have one more thingitis. And it's like break failure. It's like, oh, just quick 5 minutes. Like, how do we keep it to 5 minutes?
Yeah. Yeah.
I wish payphones were still like a thing. So I can just put in a quarter and then like, that's it. Like we're disconnected this time.
You're off. Yeah. Right. It's done. The only way I've ever seen things like that work, well, one way is to say it's the old office hours thing, right? Like on this day and this day at that time, I'm just here. Here's what I want you to know about that. It's here for you to call in. And then we think about, well, how does that get portioned? So one person doesn't take it all, right? But the other thing I think is that you can always experiment. When in doubt, call it an experiment as opposed to the new whatever, right? It's an experiment. So the experiment might be this week, I am going to practice and we're going to learn whether 5-minute phone calls are possible. Here's what I'm going for in the 5, right? How are you? How's your soul? How's your health? How are those things? What's the most important thing we should be talking about? And maybe that most important thing can just be noted, but not gone into. Mm-hmm. But what's happened is we have connected. I mean, experiment though.
When you said that, because I love that idea, and I don't remember where I first heard this idea of living life in beta mode. And so when he said that, I was like, ooh, leading in beta mode.
Well, how's that feel? Because it looks like it feels better. What does your brain like about that?
I think that it's permission to screw up and learn.
Oh, yes.
Right? Because it's like, I'm not going to get this stuff perfect. And
how boring to work for you if you're going to get it all perfect, right? Come on.
And in such ADHD fashion, like I want to be a master's level leader right now, right? It's like, you just got to put in the hours, you got to put in the reps. In my groups, I'm at almost like 2,000 hours of group facilitation. Like I can do this in my sleep. I know I'm good at it. When it comes to these kinds of meetings, like what I feel like is that there's this huge chasm between how I do group and how I, lead meetings and just lead an organization. Mm-hmm. I'm probably being harder on myself than
because you know what I think about that. I think they're not that separate.
I think this is a good place to stop, Sherri. I so enjoyed this conversation. Is there anything that you want to sort of share with our listeners? Want to leave leaders or our listeners with website, all that kind of stuff?
Oh, I want to say one more word. Fun. Whatever Eric comes up with has to be fun. That goes for all of us. Because if we don't get to have fun, if it doesn't tickle our brain in one of those ways, we're going to ditch it. And then for a lot of us, it's going to feel like a fail when in fact it wasn't. Yeah. So I love this conversation. And I hope that you and I get to talk much more about all of that, because I'm not sure you have to go figure all that out on your own. In fact, I know you don't. So anybody who wants to find me can find me at sherricannon.com. That's it. Or whatever all the stuff is, but sherricannon.com. What else would there be to know? SherriCannon. Thank you. And there's one other thought for everyone. The great resignation, all of the stuff that we see right now, we're going to find out more of the heart of all of this, right? But to your point, the trying to get good at something, what we're going to get good at right now is rolling well and understanding where are we, what's showing up. You're already keeping the warm connect with folks. It matters so much. And then after that, what matters too is, can we just keep meeting people also where they are? What are we learning here these days? Oof, a lot. Yeah. Indeed. But I guess that's another 2 hours or 2 days or whatever. So
Sherri Cannon, thank you so much. This was wonderful. And I look forward to future conversations together.
What a blast. Me too. And here's to ADHD Rewired and all of its new experimentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is ADHDrewired.com. You can find time-stamped summaries and additional resources for each episode. Apply to join our free and secret Facebook community. Learn more about our award-winning intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. Join the Adult Study Hall virtual co-working membership community. Find all the other podcasts on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. Sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content that you won't hear anywhere else. And use the search tool to find episodes on specific topics. You can do all of this at ADHDrewired.com. While you're there, click on the Patreon button. If you are a regular listener, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to you, the listener, but it's not free to produce. Plus, patrons get cool perks like ad-free episodes and access to recordings of coaching calls, and $25 a month patrons can join me once a month for a group coaching call. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD Rewired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. Subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube to see selective interviews and other videos I've made. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends, family, your therapists, your coaches, doctors, siblings, parents. And if you, your coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at the website, ADHDrewired.com. If you're a member of CHAD, ADA, or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this show and all the shows on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. And if you really loved this particular episode, please hit share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I do count on you to help spread this message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other app that supports reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at Audible by going to audibletrial.com/ADHD Rewired. Here is my list of must-listen-to audiobooks updated July 2021. Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Attached by Amir Levin and Rachel Heller. Atomic Habits by James Clear. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson. The Coaching Habit by Michael Stainer. The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Rest by Alex Sujong Kim Pang. The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins. Make It Stick. The Science of Successful Learning by Peter Brown. The Productivity Project by Chris Bailey. Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. I always recommend to my coaches and admin that they read that book. The One Thing by Gary Keller, a required reading for all of our coaching group members. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Baden. The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. And if you're looking for something a little bit more magical, I have fallen in love with the Harry Potter series, and the narrator, Jim Dale, is amazing. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus, all of her stuff is great, starting with Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, and the Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader, be sure to check out her book, Dare to Lead. Do you have something that you would like to share? Click on the podcast tab at ADHD Rewired. Click the button to be a guest at the top of the page and schedule a 15-minute interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, growing, and connecting. Self-care is not selfish. No matter what you get done or don't get done, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. And we don't need to do them in the hardest way possible. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.